The left hemisphere of the brain is specialized for grasping and getting. Okay. Left hemisphere rejects truth for 4 reasons. Number 1, the left hemisphere is delusional, and this is from the work of Iain McGilchrist, by the way. The left hemisphere is delusional. Patients with right hemisphere strokes become deluded in the most striking way. Whereas if you have a left hemisphere stroke, left hemisphere shuts down, you're not delusional if you're left with your right hemisphere intact. Left hemisphere only has a map, which is a very diminished version of reality. And the left hemisphere prizes internal consistency of its map over new evidence. So if you have a Calvinistic map worldview in your head and someone shows you Jeremiah 19:5, you will prize the map, Calvinism, over the evidence of Jeremiah 19:5. And that's why Calvinists don't believe the Bible. The sole value of the left hemisphere is utility and power, control. All is instrumentalized. Tools of power are self-selected to commonly go into the hands of those who least need to have them, like psychopaths and narcissists. That's why sometimes you have people who are the boss. And you find a lot of narcissist Calvinists, stealth Calvinists taking over churches because they're narcissistic, and that's what they like to do. So the left hemisphere of the brain is not intrinsically bad. It is supposed to operate in conjunction with the right hemisphere of the brain, with the right hemisphere taking priority and precedence. Now, we live in a society that is very reductionistic, and it tends to prioritize and produce people who optimize for left hemisphere renditions of things. And Calvinism is just one more of those things in which people who claim to be Christians are just like the world around them. They have a left hemispheric reductionistic view of things, and they've kind of shut off the right hemisphere. Now, if you had both hemispheres working in balance and in tandem with the right hemisphere leading the way, that's what you want. You need your left hemisphere. It is good for what it does as long as it's the emissary and not the master. But if you're a Calvinist or a provisionist or something like that, Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, you've made the left hemisphere the master. And that's why everything else must bow to it. Okay? The left hemisphere of the brain is not specialized for understanding. The left hemisphere can apprehend but not comprehend. The left hemisphere can drive the car but not explain how it works or do mechanic work on it, for example. Once an ideology or narrative is identified with an emotion, now we're talking about the limbic system, okay? Limbic system problems. Once an ideology or a narrative like Calvinism, Provisionism, Mormonism is identified with emotionally in the limbic system, like, oh, this is me. It takes a great deal of intentionality to uncouple the ideology from that person's view of their own identity. So the person starts to see themselves like, my identity is that I am a Calvinist. My identity is that I am a provisionist. And they start to see this as part of their identity of who they are. So when you attack the system, Calvinism, they feel personally attacked. And you'll see them post things online like, you guys hate Calvinists because they feel personally attacked. No, we just don't like Calvinism. The fact that you're sickened with it isn't, the deal. We don't hate you any more than we hate people who have cancer or other problems or mental illnesses. We'd rather the cancer and the mental illnesses not be there because we love you, right? So when we show the flaws of Calvinism, it's not because we hate you, it's because we love you and we don't want you to be sick anymore, okay? So it's like parasitic mistletoe. It's like you have this parasite of Calvinism that wraps itself around your limbic system. It often takes a great tragedy to get a person to awaken from the slumber and addiction of ideology. And if you're talking to Calvinists, you keep at it, but you have to understand that they're not going to come around until they're ready. They're not going to come, and they may never. For stage 3 people, Fowler's book, Stages of Faith, he says that if a person does not exit stage 3 by the time they are 40, it is statistically extremely unlikely that they ever will. Okay. So if you're a Calvinist and you're over age 40, I'm not saying there's no hope for you, but statistically, it's not looking good. Dell says, thoughts about syncretism. I do have a video about how Calvinism is a syncretism of Catholicism and Manichaean Gnosticism and something else anyway, and Pelagianism. Oddly enough, yeah. Calvinism is more semi-Pelagian than anybody else. But we can't get into that here because we're out of time. Once the left hemisphere dominant person, that'd be most Westerners, has emotionally identified with an ideology, religious or otherwise, they become an absolute NPC, a non-player character, the person in the computer that's just artificial intelligence. There's not a person there. They are this way. They are an NPC until something, usually tragedy, shakes them awake, and then they are still cognitive toddlers and need to recalibrate everything from the ground up. As an NPC, they will explain, post hoc rationalize, and justify any contradiction, no matter how much cognitive dissonance is required. They don't care. And that's why they do these crazy things. And the more cognitive dissonance, the more they can be gaslit by the ideology and the in-group associated with it into an ideologically possessed stupor. It's as if they're drunk or addicted. This is very difficult to combat because ideologies colonize the mind on moral grounds. Then we fool ourselves to think that it was on epistemic grounds. Oh, it's because of the data. It's because of the data. I've studied this and I know that it's true. No, you think you're righteous, moral, and virtuous for believing it. And that's why they argue on those terms. When you say, well, I don't think that's... They'll say, well, you don't believe God is sovereign. And it's a sanctimonious tone. That's a moral argument. They're not taking you to the data when they do stuff like this. Thus, the more stupid and useless and damaging a person is because of ideology, the more righteous and virtuous and moral they perceive themselves to be. It's almost like a moral Dunning-Kruger effect. And in the Dunning-Kruger effect, the less a person knows, the more they think they know. And the more they know, the less they estimate themselves to know. Well, if you create genuine morality with effectiveness, okay, the more stupid and useless a person is because of ideology, the more righteous, virtuous, and moral they perceive themselves to be. But if you find somebody who actually is effective and agentic and can get some stuff done, they're not thinking in moralistic terms. They don't see themselves necessarily as righteous, virtuous, or moral. They're just trying to be effective. How do we interact with people who make it out of stage 3? Well, Romans chapter 12, condescend to men of lower estate, and not condescension in the rude kind of way. It actually means the same way you would talk to a child or a dog. You meet people at their level, deal with them at their level. Now, it's easier if they're not combative. If they're combative, don't be friends with an angry man. If they're combative and antagonistic, which is a feature of pathological stage 3, then you probably just need to get away from them. But to the degree that you can just get along and have Thanksgiving dinner with them, you do the same thing you do with a toddler or a child or a 6th grader or something like that. Just, that's nice. Okay. Okay. Gotcha. And then later on, when they're not around, the adults can talk. Doesn't matter how old they are. It's just how it is. Okay. We do have videos, by the way, when you're asking how to do this. I have a video, Colossians, Grace and Salt, Colossians. One of the last ones we did in Colossians, in the Colossians series. So go look that up in the Colossians playlist. And then there's another one called Protocol X for how, well, that's not necessarily whether they're out of stage 3 or not. But anyway, you get the idea. But if there's no hope for somebody, just get along for the time that they're there. Be nice, be cordial, do small talk, do the things. Maybe poke and prod where you can, but don't expect much. And don't let it get ideological. Just talk about the weather and how the Saints are doing, or the Cowboys, or whatever. Just keep it light. They're not gonna be able to discuss things of meaning. Okay. We actually have a video on this slide here called "The Axis of Moralism and Effectiveness" that kind of double clicks on that issue a little bit more. We're about to end this video. It is time for me to go. Thanks for showing up.